We'll be picking up our study in 2 Kings, and of course the overall theme we're looking at through 2 Kings is the fall of the nation. We'll see the fall of Israel first, followed by that fall of Judah. But right now we're in chapter 1 looking at this king who did not believe in God. It's not that he didn't know that there was a God, but the problem was he put his stock in far too many gods, and he didn't trust in God and God alone. And so we're talking about King Ahaziah here. The misfortune that we see at the start of this particular chapter from verses 1 and 2. Chapter 1, verse 1, what's the problem? You have rebellion against Israel. You have the Moabites who are rebelling against Israel with the death of Ahab. So there's a problem. You have death of a king, some transition period going on, followed then by Moab coming in and rebelling against them. And we talked a little bit about that in previous classes. But then verse 2, what's the other problem going on?
He got hurt, so he was trying to find a God to see if he was going to be okay.
King Ahaziah gets hurt, right? He's, looking out the window, probably what it would have been most likely, the latticing on the upper story. He falls out of it, hurts himself, and he's going to try to figure out, am I going to live? Am I going to die? And where does he try to go to get that figured out from?
The God of Ekron.
He goes to Beelzebub, the god of Ekron. He sends his messengers there to inquire, will I live, will I die? That's in essence what's going on. Well, then we get to verses 3 through 8 where we find the message of the Lord. What's the message that he's going to receive? You're not going to get out of the bed, but you shall surely die. So the angel of the Lord brings this message to Elijah, who stops Ahaziah's messengers before they can get to Beelzebub, before they get to Ekron, which would have been about 60 miles away. He gives them the message, and then from that point, they take it back to King Ahaziah. They tell King Ahaziah what this particular message is, and what's Ahaziah's response to that? Who told you these things, right? And so they say, well, it was a hairy man, and this is what he was wearing. He had this leather belt around his waist, and Ahaziah knew exactly who it was, didn't he? Right? He said, well, it is Elijah the Tishbite. And Ahaziah and Elijah would have had a little bit of history because Elijah and Ahaziah's parents had history. Remember who Ahaziah's parents were? Ahab and Jezebel. And so you see the problems that were within all of that. So the situation with all the misfortune, the message that comes that he's not going to come up from his bed, but he shall surely die. This is where we were when we finished off in our previous class. And so we'll go ahead and read this section again and then kind of get a little more into it. 2 Kings chapter 1. If somebody would, just go ahead right now and read verses 9 through 14. Actually, do 9 through 12.
Then the king sent to him a captain of 50 with his 50 men. So he went up to him. And there he was, sitting on the top of the hill. And he spoke to him, Man of God, the king has said, come down. So Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, If I am a man of God, then let fire come down from the heavens and consume you and your 50 men. And fire came down from the heaven and consumed him and his 50. Then he sent him another captain of 50 and his 50 men. And he answered and said to him, Man of God, thus has the king said, come down quickly. So Elijah answered and said to them, I am a man of God. Let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. And the fire of God came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. Again, he sent a third captain.
We'll stop there for just a moment.
Okay.
Thank you. So we see the situation of what's going on. You have this picture of Elijah just kind of sitting up on this hill, and Ahaziah is sending captains with 50 men under him. So you're talking about a pretty strong show of force to come after one man. Well, we understand Elijah had some miracles that he performed along the way. Think back to 1 Kings 18, up on Mount Carmel, the victory over Baal and the prophets there. Ahaziah knew that Elijah had the power of God behind him. Well, through all of this, he's going to be afraid of what may come. Yeah, I know there's some popping going on. I don't know what it is, though. I'm not hitting anything.
You want to try some different batteries, or you think it's just the mic?
It's probably just the mic. I'll just move behind this.
Time to buy.
What giver?
It's a battery.
All right, we'll do that. That'll work. So we've got the situation again. Elijah's up on the hill. You have Ahaziah sending these captains with the 50 men under him there and trying to, in essence, intimidate him. Now we read it, and what are they calling Elijah in this?
Man of God.
Man of God. We might look at that on the surface and think, well, that's a compliment. But was it?
No.
No. For one, it's just kind of a title at times that would have been given to prophets. But did Ahaziah really believe in the Lord God of Israel? No. Otherwise, he would have gone to the Lord God of Israel. That's the whole problem that's going on here is Ahaziah, the king of Israel, did not believe in the God of Israel. That's why he went to inquire of Beelzebub and Ekron. And so here are these captains coming. The first captain comes with his 50. Man of God, the king has said, come down. And what's Elijah say? Well, if I really am a man of God, you're about to see it. Because fire's coming down from heaven and consuming you. And what happens? Fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. Here comes the second captain. I wonder in my mind, is this something that Ahaziah knew might happen? And so he had backups in place? How much time elapsed between the captain and his first 50 and the second captain and his 50 coming in? But the end result between the first captain and his 50 and the second captain and his 50 didn't change anything, did it? And then we're going to see in the next couple of verses it happens a third time. But before that, Aaron, you had something?
Yeah, I just can't imagine what the second captain of 50 came up and there's 51 burnt bodies laying there, and you're like, we're supposed to do what here? You know?
Yeah.
But we see that the third is a little wiser when they see 102 burnt bodies
Yes.
laying there. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I was going to mention with the third is the fact when he comes up, evidently he knew what was happening.
Yeah.
So either he was close enough he could see all of it take place before he got there, or like you mentioned, whenever he walks up on the scene, he's looking at his fallen comrades there and Elijah sitting up on the hill, and he knows what happened. So let's have somebody read now 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 13 and 14.
Again,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Again, he sent a third captain of 50 with his 50 men. And the third captain of 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah and pleaded with him and said to him, Man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your sight. Look, fire has come down from heaven and burned up the first two captains of 50 with their 50. Now let my life now be precious in your sight.
And then, Brian, were you about to read a second ago?
Yes, sir.
Why don't you go ahead and read verses 15 and 16 if you would?
And the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, Go down with him, do not be afraid of him. So he arose and went down with him to the king. Then he said to him, Thus says the Lord, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die.
So the third captain comes and he starts off where you think he's going to say the same thing, right? He starts out by addressing Elijah and saying, Man of God. But things have changed, haven't they? The third captain shows some real humility, considering his own life, but also the life of the men under him. He pleads with Elijah, let's not do what we've done to the previous 102 people who showed up before you. And, of course, then Elijah gets the message from the angel of the Lord that it's going to be okay. Go down with them, and then once again reiterates the message to tell the king. Is it because there's no God in Israel that you would go to Beelzebub, that you would go to Ekron? And, of course, the message that he will not come down from bed to the bed to which he had gone up, but he shall surely die.
I love how it's an immediate change. And I can see this when we see the consequences of those who go before us. And then we say, okay, well, I'm God's, you know. You can see right here where he says, please let the life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours. They came upon the king's request, right? Well, they're no longer allegiant to the king at this point. Because of the calamity that just happened, they're now allegiant to Elijah and God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love that. It's like, whoa, we're not with him, we're with you.
Yeah, they see the true power there. And I think it's telling as well when we think about everything that's going on here. There are some who would come to this particular point and say, well, this captain and the 50 men under him and the second captain and the 50 under him, they didn't do anything to deserve this. So the question that some would pose in this is this a just thing that took place? Well, remember who they're being sent by. A wicked king and a wicked nation who has shown zero regard for God for quite a few generations now. There's consequences to actions. And this is simply some of those consequences that come along. If they were really concerned with doing what was right by God, do you think Ahaziah would have tried to go to Beelzebub and Ekron in the first place? If he was really concerned with God, he would have gone to him initially. If he was worried that his prayer wouldn't get, beyond the palace roof there, then he would have gone to Elijah initially. He would have done the right thing in that. This is simply consequences to actions. And we know that God's always going to do what is right.
And sorry, this will be my last one.
No, you're good.
Talking tonight, but it's also in the heart of those men that were going to arrest him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't deserve. Well, what were they willing to do? They were willing to obey the king and go against God and a known man of God and go and arrest him on the king's behalf because he spoke the truth.
Well, and you talk about what they're doing in this. History has shown that especially in pagan nations, and really that's what Israel was at this point, was a pagan nation, they had a practice of trying to go and intimidate prophets and intimidate those who would pronounce a curse on a particular nation. So in Ahaziah's mind, what he's heard that's going to happen to him is a curse. He's not getting up out of bed, but he's going to die. So what's the best way to change that when you think like everybody else at that time? Let's show a sign of force and get this prophet and get that prophet's God to change their mind on this. That's why you have the captain and the 50. That's why you have the second captain and his 50. It's a sign of force. It's a threat against Elijah, and really it's a threat against God in that. Now there are a couple of lessons within this that we can think about. One particular lesson here that we might consider is the fact that Satan is not going to quit. You think about what Ahaziah is doing in this, that he just keeps sending the captain and the 50, and really what it seems like is it didn't work with the first, it didn't work with the second. If nothing had changed by the third, nothing would have changed by the fourth or by the fifth, and you see how it keeps going. He was going to keep doing what he could until he tried to convince Elijah to change the message, but it was not going to work. Another lesson we could think of on this particular thought here is the fact, if you're in Ahaziah's shoes, you can't intimidate God. No matter how fearful a threat, no matter how powerful you might be on this earth, you can't intimidate God. People can threaten whenever we teach them the truth, some sort of consequence against us. They can say, well, you're going to lose your job if you say that, if you keep doing that. Do we let it intimidate us? People may say, well, if you do that, someone's going to beat you up for it. Do we let it intimidate us? You may get thrown into jail. You may, whatever the case is, whatever the threat, people are going to try to intimidate us to not continue to preach and to speak the truth. Do we let it work? Or instead, do we act like Elijah in these things? Do we make sure that we continue to do what is right? And of course, we'll see how Elijah handles the situation as we keep going here. And so we've seen this lesson for the king. And actually, we can even, I had it here, I thought I had it a little bit further on. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. But you see what it is that takes place. Angel of the Lord tells Elijah, go, repeat the message again. Is it because there's no God in Israel? You're not going to come up from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die. How hard do you think it was for Elijah to go into the king and to tell him this message? Knowing what the king's plan has been all along? What would we have done in this situation? Would we even have gone and followed the captain and the 50 back? I mean, even if we were assured by the angel of the Lord himself that everything would be okay to go, and again, this is the message you need to carry, would we have actually carried that message? Or would we have kind of cut around the corners and, well, this is what I said at first, but now, would we have been intimidated? Or would we have shown the same type of faith in God as did Elijah? What's it going to take to have this level of faith? What was that?
I just said total faith.
Total faith, right? I have a complete trust in God. It means that, like you say, with all of my totality, I'm not going to let any sort of doubt creep in. If God says it, then I'm going to stand by it. But what kind of respect does that mean I must have for the message that God gives? I have to have absolute respect, right? I have to be willing to accept what God says as truth and understand that no man can change the truth, and no matter how many threats or how hard of a threat that someone may place on me, that's not going to change the truth, because the truth is the truth regardless of what man says. Do I have that kind of trust in God's word? Do I have that kind of respect for God's word? Do I have that kind of trust in God himself? Elijah did, but do I? Or instead, do I maybe have some of my doubts? Am I too busy maybe acting a little bit like Ahaziah and saying, well, I don't like the message that God has to say, so let me see if I can find some other message that fits what I want it to say? Do I try and shape it to what I want it to be? Or instead, do I simply just trust in what it is that God has said himself? And so we see this lesson for the king. And then the last two verses here, we'll see the end of the king. Did I see your hand, Ed?
It's a level of faith. Last week we looked at Daniel, and Daniel had that. But what you saw in Daniel, think of the furnace, think of the lion's den, in that his measure of faith was, I believe God will deliver me from this, but it was also a level of faith that said, if God, it is better even if God, to follow God, even if he doesn't deliver me, even if I die, I'm better to follow if that's God's will. That is a measure of faith.
Right. I think about even Paul in Philippians chapter 1. You talk about that measure of faith, that whether we live or we die, we're going to do what's right by God. God's going to take care of it. Philippians 1, around verse 20, verse 21, you remember what Paul would say there? Whether by life, whether by death, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body. For me to live is Christ, and to die is what? Gain. That requires faith, does it not? It says, I don't care what the physical consequences might be for living the truth and for preaching the truth, because my trust in God is greater. I don't care what you may take away from me. I don't care what you may do to me. Do you have the level of faith as Paul? To Dad's point, you have the level of faith like Daniel and his friends. You have the level of faith like Elijah. And if we don't have that level of faith, then I'd submit to you we're going to end up like King Ahaziah here. And we're going to meet the same end as he. Somebody read these last two verses of 2 Kings chapter 1.
So Ahaziah died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken, because he had no son. Jehoram became king in his place in the second year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaziah which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Israel?
And so you see the end of Ahaziah. Did he get what he wanted here? No. But what did he get? Exactly what God said he was going to get. God's word is true no matter how hard we try to change it. And if we don't want to accept it right now, then we'll have to accept it in the end. And that's the problem we see with Ahaziah. But I also want to mention, you look at the end of verse 17, and who do we now have as king in Judah and king in Israel? Jehoram and Jehoram. Best I can tell you on all that is when you do things your own way, and you start getting into sin, things get messy and things get complicated. Was it ever God's plan or God's intent or God's design for there to be two kings over his people in a split and divided nation? Absolutely not. In fact, it wasn't even the plan for them to have a king in the first place, but it's what the people wanted. Again, you do things your way, it's going to get confusing, it's going to get complicated, it's going to get messy. Maybe that's me reading into it a little bit too much, but that's the only way in my head I can wrap my mind around two Jehorims reigning at once.
And this goes back to ultimately overall God's plan. There were never supposed to be anybody left in the land to have them turn away to some other kings. Like, it goes back to what you're doing may have generational effects on your family. And so these are the generational effects from their great-great-great-great-grandfathers who didn't, we're responsible for our own sin, but it can have an effect on those who come after you, consequences. And this is the classic play out of there should have never been any other gods worshipped in this whole land, because every single one of these people, the Moabs, weren't supposed to be allowed to be their servants and survive, and the gods of Baal, all of them people were supposed to be annihilated in God's ultimate plan. So it kind of goes back to the fact that if we're going by God's will and his plan, it's for our best, even if it is uncomfortable at times.
Right, and they had opportunity to do what was right and receive the fullness of God's blessings, but they didn't want to. Too many of them were acting like Ahaziah and going about things their own way and not doing everything and going to everyone except for God himself. And that's going to create problems time and time and time and time again. And if we can't learn that lesson by looking at this history right here, we're going to be learning the lesson in our lives. But you know what? We don't have to learn that lesson in our lives if we'll simply learn it from their lives. Johnny?
I'd say their problem with not following God's command and driving all those, annihilating all those people, it became too hard, It's too hard for us to do. We'll just let them live here and be our servants, instead of trusting in God to be with them and for them. And as long as we faithfully serve Him down here, He will be with us.
What if Elijah?
If we faithfully serve Him, and then we die, then we will be with Him.
Well, what if Elijah had said it was too hard, right? You remember when he was kind of ready to throw the towel in after 1 Kings 18? And God kind of reminded him of the whole situation and the bigger picture. And thankfully, Elijah didn't say it was too hard and didn't throw the towel in at that point. Elijah continued faithfully. We're about to see actually in chapter 2 that reward Elijah receives. And I hope I can remember kind of your thought on that, because it just sparked with me a good application that can come in the next chapter as well. And so we'll see if we're able to get down to that. But I want to mention verse 18. Did you have something, Mom?
Well, I'm confused on verse 17. Can you repeat what you said? You said Jehoram, the son of Ahab, was the king of Israel, and Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, is the king of Judah?
Yes.
At the same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, confusing.
They like the name Jehoram.
Evidently. I guess, there could have been worse names.
Good, what is this, 4th century BC name?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so we'll see then verse 18 before we get into chapter 2. The rest of the acts of Ahaziah that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? We talked just briefly about that thought of the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel in our introduction class, that's not the same as the books of Chronicles we have here in our 66. That would have been probably some sort of a history book that they could have referred to see more about what Ahaziah did in his reign. But we know enough about Ahaziah from this chapter right here to tell us Ahaziah is not really anybody that we're going to learn something positive from, are we? Because Ahaziah didn't even believe there was a God in Israel to do what it is that he needed to do. And so that's 2 Kings chapter 1. Something I'm going to try to do at the end of each of these chapters is try to give kind of 3 takeaways. So at the end of each chapter, we'll just try to kind of look at the big picture, 3 big lessons we can learn. First lesson that we can take from 2 Kings chapter 1 is to go to God in times of uncertainty, and then, of course, also in times of certainty. Ahaziah is in a great time of uncertainty, is he not? Very beginning of the chapter. His daddy just died, and now he's reigning as king in the midst of a rebellion of people who had previously served him for generations, and now he's dealing with the crisis of health. What should he have done? Go to God. But what didn't he do? He did not go to God. Whether it's a time of uncertainty or a time of certainty, we need to go to God. Many times in uncertainty in our life, that's when we run to God. That's when we need God. But then when things start to seem somewhat certain, we turn away from him, do we not? Well, it shouldn't be that way. Whatever the case, go to God. Second lesson I believe we can take is that Satan is persistent. Think back to the middle of the chapter as King Ahaziah keeps sending the captains in the 50, and had the third captain not shown some humility, I really believe that the cycle would have continued. Ahaziah was going to do whatever he could to get Elijah to change the message. But of course Elijah doesn't change the message, and that's where we find this third lesson here, that faith increases courage. Had Elijah not had faith, I really don't know that he would have maintained the message of the Lord there. If we don't have faith, at some point the pressure is going to get too hard on us, and we're either going to compromise the message or turn away from the message altogether. We have to have faith if we're ever going to have the courage to continue to do what is right. And so that gets us through 2 Kings chapter 1. Now we'll come into chapter 2. And in 2 Kings chapter 2, the thought for this particular chapter is the passing of the mantle. There's more transition that's going on in the nation. Of course, we've seen at the beginning of chapter 1 a transition from Ahab to Ahaziah, and then the transition from Ahaziah to Jehoram. And then chapter 2, we're going to see there's a transition even among the prophets of God. We're seeing in this particular chapter how everything when it's a prophet has been Elijah, 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 and now who is it about to be? Elisha. And so there's, more fun confusion. Is it Elijah? Is it Elisha? If you just kind of blend the SH and the J together, then you're covered either way that you say it. So we're going to see Elijah to Elisha in this particular chapter. We'll start out verses 1 through 7, noticing Elisha's loyalty. If somebody could, would you go ahead and read for us 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 7.
And it came to pass when the Lord was about to take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Bethel."
Go ahead and stop there for just a moment. So we look at those two particular verses, and we're told what it is that's about to be happening. What's about to come?
Elijah's about to be taken to heaven.
He's going to be taken up into heaven by a whirlwind. But of course, with him, all the while, you have Elisha, who's going to go with him on from Gilgal. And then, of course, Elijah's telling him here, "Please stay, because the Lord has sent me on to Bethel." And I think I changed something here. No, I didn't. Okay, so yeah, thinking about that particular thought of how it is that we know what's about to take place. Elijah knows, Elisha knows, but what do? Do they start working to check things off their bucket list? What do? They go about the work of the Lord, right? What if we knew that our time was about to be up? What would we be doing? Hopefully the will of the Lord. Right? What are we doing if we know our time's about to be up? Of course, we can make a lot of application through it. Think about the fact none of us know exactly when our time's going to be up. There may be a health diagnosis that gives us a little more of a window, but even that's still just something of an estimate there. But regardless, what should we be doing each and every day? Serving God, right? Going about the business of the Lord until it is our time to go. And so there's a lesson I believe we can take from that, looking at this with Elijah. But we keep reading, and let's go on. Somebody read then verses 3 down through verse 7.
Now the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you not know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" And he said, Yes, I know. Keep silent. Then Elijah said to him, Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Jericho. But he said, As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So they came to Jericho. Now the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho came to Elisha and said to him, Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today? So he answered, Yes, I know. Keep silent. Then Elijah said to him, Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to the Jordan. But he said, As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So the two of them went on. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood facing them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Now Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water, and it was divided this way and that, so that the two of them crossed over on dry ground.
So we see in these, and we'll stop there, Johnny, thank you. And so we see in these particular verses then how they keep going about the work of the Lord. Now I say in this and call this particular section Elisha's loyalty. How do we see Elisha's loyalty throughout these verses? He doesn't leave, right? Each place, what does Elijah say to Elisha? Stay here. I'm going to keep going. You stay here. Each time, what's Elisha say? I will not leave you. As your soul lives, as the Lord lives, I will not leave you. Maybe you can think in your mind, make a reference if you're taking notes back to Ruth and Naomi in Ruth 1 about 14 to 16 or 17 there, and you see very similar type of devotion, very similar type of loyalty. But it's not just loyalty through Elijah himself telling him to leave. What else is faced at each particular place? All right, so you have these sons of the prophets, not that they were literally sons to their father who was a prophet, but rather that was just kind of a classification of the group of prophets. Kind of the picture I have in my mind is almost like they were in sort of the school of the prophets, if you will. And so they're kind of up and coming and they're training. And each place they're saying, well, Elisha, don't you know what's about to happen to Elijah? Now, they may not have meant anything by it, but do you not think that might have been a little bit discouraging? I mean, there are times in which we will communicate things, we will ask things without an intent of being discouraging, but when you get down to it, sometimes we can be discouraging. You have somebody that wants to do the work of the Lord. You got a younger guy that wants to be a preacher, and then, sometimes people will say, well, there's no money to be made in that. Don't you know all these other areas you could use those skills? I'm not saying that those things were said to me. I'm just in broad and general. But you see what I mean in that will push people in certain directions and sometimes unintentionally steer them away from other things, because it's not that we mean anything bad by it, but under the surface, can it not also be a discouragement of something good? And so Elisha's pushing through a lot of those things here. Try to show maps whenever they're pertinent to these things. First, we see him going from Gilgal to Bethel. Put up on the map on this particular slide kind of the general thought of Gilgal. This would have been the Gilgal you read of in Jericho. But really, I think geographically and from what I've kind of been looking at and researching, that there was also another location of a Gilgal that was of lesser importance than Joshua's Gilgal there, which would have been just a little bit further north of Bethel. And so like I say, geographically speaking, I think this makes more sense because of the route that's taken. Not to say it wasn't the other Gilgal, but there's possibility in that as well. Just trying to show some options here on the map. But they go from Gilgal to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, which is right back by Joshua's Gilgal. That's why I think maybe the one a little further north, because I don't know of the distance of there back. Could be just possibility in that. But that's where he comes back to of Jericho, and after Jericho, where do they go? They go on to the Jordan. And so that's kind of where we are on the map of all of these things as Elijah was nearing the end of his life. A couple of questions in this, and we talked about this just a little bit, but thinking about some of that discouragement from the sons of the prophets. looking at how Elisha handles it, how should we respond to any sort of discouragement that comes our way when we're trying to do the work of the Lord?
Tell them to be quiet, keep quiet.
There you go. Sometimes it's a matter of just saying, be quiet. Right? Now, of course, we think about the situation here of who it is that's saying these things. If you're talking about those who are kind of in training in school to become prophets, they're going to have to learn some hard lessons along the way. And teachers, have you ever had to tell students, be quiet? Right? So we understand what that looks like. It's not anything disrespectful as far as that goes, but you're exactly right.
What did Jesus tell Peter?
Get behind me, Satan. Right? And sometimes we have to be able to say, be quiet. Are you even thinking about what you're saying right now? Have you thought about the implications of that? What if I did stop? What if I didn't go on? What if Elisha didn't follow Elijah all the way to the Jordan and across the Jordan to the other side? The mantle would have been lying there until who knows who came along and picked it up. Who knows? How do we respond to the discouragement? Follow this example here of Elisha. Keep pushing through. Keep showing some loyalty through these things. I think I had another thought there about why might Elijah have been telling Elisha to stay behind. Don't have that much time, so we won't spend too long on this particular thought and discussion. I wonder if maybe Elijah was kind of like me and just doesn't like to say goodbye, so he just wanted to get out the door and leave without it becoming too hard and too challenging. But maybe that's just a thought there, something we can think about. In times of transition, it's always hard. But then another lesson from these verses, what might we be able to learn from Elisha's devotion to Elijah? He was persistent that he was not going to leave him. How can we apply that for our relationships today? Be persistent in it. Be devoted. Elisha, Elijah, you have mentor and mentee. Should that tell us something about relationship between older Christians and younger Christians? Those of us who are younger Christians, that's a lesson to us to look up to the older Christians. Older Christians, it's a lesson to you all to be able to find some of us younger Christians to help along the way, to help mentor and to help train up. Good lessons in these things. I know that was the second bell. I want to share with you, though, one quote, and then we'll be done with class. It says, "We never know when a friend and fellow worker will be taken from us. God told Elisha that Elijah was leaving him, but we don't know when it will be our time or a friend's time to go to heaven. What great opportunities we miss by wasting time on trifles when we could be learning from one another about the Lord and His Word. It rejoices my heart when I see younger Christians and Christian workers appreciating the, quote, senior saints, the veterans of Christian service, and learning from them. One day these giants will be called home and will no longer be able to learn from them." And so let's take the opportunity to do what we can to strengthen our relationships with each other and be learning from each other, even as Elisha learned from Elijah all the way. And we'll stop there for this evening.